Hello, good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, may I warmly welcome you to the Habibie Center's public lecture series, where we invite and are visited by experts from universities, think tanks, government institutions, authors, policymakers, and key opinion leaders to deliver general lectures on international affairs. Our public lecture series today will be discussing the Ukrainian crisis and its implications for the global political chessboard. May I also use this opportunity to kindly introduce myself. My name is Taufan Samudra. I am one of the researchers of the ASEAN Studies Program at the Habibie Center, and I will be your moderator for today's lecture. On this beautiful afternoon, I am immensely honored to be joined by Professor Anis Bajrektarevic from the University of Vienna. Professor Anis is a former Ministry of Foreign Affairs official and a career diplomat. He is currently a research fellow at the Institute for Modern Political History Analysis. For the past 2 decades, Professor Anis has taught geopolitical affairs, international law, including international relations, law of international organizations, European law, theory of law, as well as sustainable development. He has also served as a pro bono expert for numerous academic institutions, think tanks, and intergovernmental institutions such as the UNECE, OSCE, Council of Europe, and Oxford Academic of Total Intelligence. He is also the author of dozens presentations, publications, and speeches. His writings are frequently published in all 5 continents, over 70 countries, and translated into 25 different languages. Just early this month, he published his latest book entitled Genesis, Institutions and Instruments of the European Union, a concise guide on Euro multilateralism. This book is designed to be a concise summary of the history of the European Union, starting with the rebirth of a common European vision right after the Second World War. This book will elaborate on all the vital events and treaties that have come to substantially shape the course of the European Union to the point where it is today. I am highly convinced that his vast experience from his various designations would enrich our discussion today. Now, before we continue with our discussion, the lecture today will be divided into 2 sessions. Firstly, the presentation from Professor Anis. After all his presentation is concluded, we will move on to the Q&A session. As you may know, this lecture is also publicly live streamed at our YouTube channel, and our viewers can ask questions or give any comments on the YouTube's live chat feature. Now that we have covered all the technical aspects, I would like to invite our guest to the floor. Professor Anis, the time is yours.
Thank you and good afternoon to Jakarta. Good morning and good evening to all our viewers from wherever they come. It's my great pleasure to be this time virtually with the Habibie Center. There is a long, let's say, connection or let's say a long-lasting connection between me and Southeastern Asia, particularly Indonesia. And within Jakarta, one of the places is definitely Habibie Center. So I was even bringing my own large group of students repeatedly to Indonesia, and then Habibie Center was answering the courtesy call. I published one of the, let's say, policy papers that lately became known, was like 12, 13 years ago, which is no Asian century, and we will come to this, elaborating on multilateralism. And then I was giving talks at Habibie Center at several occasions, and last time was shortly before Corona when I was in Jakarta, and I happened to be in the city when the President Habibie passed away. So there is also a long friendship with one of his most vibrant sons, Ilham, with whom I'm befriended for more than a decade, nearly 2 decades. And he was giving also us a pleasure of being guest at my university here in Austria So he was coming also here, not only meeting my students in Indonesia. So basically this is a pleasure to be with you again. And of course, the topic is rather sad one, but of course we have to elaborate on this thoroughly. And I'm very happy, and I feel really honored that you are inviting me to share a little of my insights on the topic. I think first and most of all, you play the title, very title, in a proper way. Of course, the entire topic and the problem is so complex, and it's so full of the hot air that basically one has to be very cautious. And when I try to list let's say, the issues or the items on to which we have to take a closer look, it went into a lengthy paper. So basically, what I will try to cover is not to give you conclusions, but actually to share with you what are, in my views, the items or the issues that we have to consider and to tackle and to give answer to, if we want to elaborate and thoroughly understand what is going on and what outcome might be, firstly, in the region globally, but also in Southeastern Asia, notably in the country of Republic of Indonesia. So basically, it is divided in several chapters, and that starts with the main historical drives, with the political military aspects, the legal aspects, economic aspects, ideological aspects, or the deeper meanings of the conflict, future outcome, of course, with whether we will end up in a global realignment or decoupling, and finally the implications for Republic of Indonesia, or the tentative, including the tentative proposals for the KEMLU, for the foreign minister or ministry, or for the foreign service of the country, and ASEAN as such. So talking about the main historical drives, when it comes to the Ukrainian crisis, we have to go back to the competing universalisms, and the question whether of the two parallel worlds, which were not Venus and the Mars, but actually two Martian worlds. It starts with the great schism of the 11th century, or most precisely 1054, when the church has been split, and the universalism of Kiev, Russia, and Rimo-Catholic Ummah, the world of Rimo-Catholic Church. And then the second would be Christianity, and essentially operationalization of religion for ideological purposes, and the struggle of the center of interpretation in its insecure assertiveness, or the peripheral challenger who is challenging the center of interpretation. So we don't talk here about religion, but about the operationalization of religion for ideological purposes, usage of religion for ideology. Okay, and then who gives the interpretation, because it remains the main issue. The book of Holy Bible is the same, but interpretations are different. And then who has an exclusivity of interpretation? Then the age of so-called anthropogeographic inversion, which starts with the grand discoveries, so-called grand discoveries, when the European civilization was really expanding and was actually projecting itself politically, militarily, but also demographically. Then Europe as an external threat to Russia. So it goes with the Napoleonic Wars, with the Hitler coalition, so-called Barbarossa, that was going through Ukraine. Then the smaller episodes, which are going with the Crimean War of 1853 and up to 56, so it was nearly 3-year war. Having Ottomans, France, and Piedmont, Sardinia, so some sort of Italy at that time, and the UK versus Russia, in which Russia was pushed away over the Crimean War. Then the European interventionism, which was starting after the Bolshevik Revolution, so it was lasting for some 4 bloody years between 1918 and 22, which opened so-called the time or the era of so-called the Red Terror within the Soviet Russia. And then Russo-Polish humiliating war between 1919 and 21. So then the identical shape of today's continental Europe, which is called European Union, and its escalation with the Russian Federation. Because if we see the size and the shape of so-called Napoleonic coalition that was attacking Russia in early 19th century, if we see the Hitler coalition, and if we see the size of EU, there is an astonishing similarity, okay? Which of course is symbolic, but even more than symbolic. And then the 3D solution that were taking place in Eastern Europe with Russia as it's being seen as the huge resource, the last resource that could be conquered and split, whose actually spoils of war could be split among the parties. So this would go into the chapter of the main historical drivers. And as you see, I was just opening the items that we have to consider if we want to get a complete picture of the situation. Then we come to the politico-military aspect, which is the second aspect of the whole story. And this is the astonishing lack on the side of so-called collective West of the critical insights, of elementary communication with Russian Federation, and then the dangerous security experiment of conflict escalation through antagonization of Russia, which is supported by state adventurism in a way. So the astonishing lack on the side of the collective West, it's a critical insight, first of all, about the Russian reasons, capabilities, intentions, outreach, probable outcome, and the lasting effects. So we are lacking, because there is a lot of hot air, there is a lot of propaganda, but very few are very sober and very fact-based analytical texts and the contributions that are available on internet, because internet is exploding as it was exploding on Corona for 2 years now, is exploding on Russia invading Ukraine and so on and so forth. But astonishingly, there is a lack of fundamental insights. And then on communication, because there was practically no communication for over 2 months. And then European elected politicians and the cheerleading intellectuals are actually contributing to further hot air instead of actually giving the sober analysis of the situation. And then who are the protagonists here in the conflict? Is it the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, or it's a NATO facing Russia on the Ukrainian soil? We have roughly 500,000 of Ukrainian armed forces facing some estimates are telling not more than 200,000 Russian forces. And then the peculiar nature of the military action. So the historio-political background of Ukraine, which starts from the Kiev, Russia to Soviet Russia. So it's a very peculiar. And then the ethnic, linguistic, and religious composite of Ukraine. So basically, if you take this phone and you imagine that this is Ukraine, then if you go from the left down side up to the right upper side and you make a diagonal, then you would, in the lower part, you would have a Russian, roughly and very, very tentatively, but just to illustrate you, that would be the Russian-speaking population, and then the upper part would be Ukrainian-speaking population. So it's not only that we have the Russian Orthodox Church, we have also the Ukrainian Orthodox Church or Ukrainian Union Church, which means Orthodox service, but recognizing Rimo-Catholic Pontifex Maximus of Rome as their supreme leader. Then we have Galicianers, then we have Polish minority, Romanian, Hungarian minority, then we have Tatars, the Turkophones that are living in the southern portions of the country, who are absolutely not Christians, but Muslims, predominantly Sunni Muslims. And they don't live only on Crimea or the southern portions of Moldova, but they live also in the other parts of Ukraine. So it's very complex, let's say, the picture. Then the alarming Gini coefficient or Gini index, which means disparity, actually the gap between rich and poor. Then very poor human development index country data, which are actually, unfortunately, including the very high level of organized crime and increase, depopulation, deindustrialization of Ukraine, regressive taxation policy. That means actually that the poorer you are, the more taxation you get. You know, the richer you are, the less taxation you get. Then the poor labor and environmental standards, which were dominant in the country, not only for a few years, but actually for past nearly 3 decades. Then dismal political collective labor, media, and individual rights especially in the post-Maidan Ukraine. So it was an existing trend that the collective labor, media, and individual rights were jeopardized in Ukraine, but it especially accelerated by 2014. And then the election promise of current incumbent President Zelensky, winning actually 70% of electoral vote on a promise that actually Donbas would be, Donbas region, the eastern region, contested region of Ukraine, would be peacefully integrated through the existing machinery of Minsk talks. And then we are coming to media. So the censorship of media, the frenzy of media, destructive acceleration through media of the conflict, and then the long history of the censorship in liberal democracies. So we have openly to talk that actually liberal democracies love to portray themselves as very free, but actually we have to give the second look and to see actually the long history of censorship that exists in the liberal democracies. Then what started also with the corona crisis, pornography of number. I call it pornography of number. So a lot of numbers, and every news are starting with numbers. So the deeper psychologization of issue, and it starts with the COVID to Ukraine. So it's also manufacturing consent of people. Then we have so-called pools of the public opinion, and then we claim after this, frenzy of media, then we claim, aha, public opinion supports this or that. Is it so, or it's manufactured consent? And then fearization, creating fear all the time, triggering and perpetuating fear. And as we know, fear is the currency of control. More fear, more control. Then boosting emotional charge, personalization or psychologization of the conflict. It's Zelensky versus President Putin. So it's not actually countries, but the persons fighting, nearly like a pistoleros, in some sort of the gun duel. So it's nearly portrayed very often like that. And the further escalation of conflict, feeding the negative spiral, actually, we need the conflict. And then links between media compliance and the external sovereign national depth. So media orientation and the external depth of countries have certain astonishing similarities, and I invite researchers to further study this. And then singularization of foreign aid to Ukraine. So we have a questionable transparency of donors and the receiving and the receivers. Who gets what is pledged and what is really delivered, which means are used, whether we have a public procurement or not. And then quality and configuration of military aid. What is really at stake here? Then environmental hazards for the fertile soils and the underground waters of Ukraine. As we know, Ukraine is a supplier of food, and Indonesia, for example, is also importing food items not only from Russia, but also very much from Ukraine. And then security risks for the Black Sea theater and Europe from from actually diverting stockpiles, because when a lot of weaponry and equipment is coming allegedly to the country, so it usually may come into the wrong hands. And we see it also from the conflicts of Middle East, that a lot of, let's say, guns and explosive devices ended up on the black market in Europe as well. Now we come to the third item, which is a legal aspect. And then the very spirit of the UN Charter, indivisibility or non-separability of collective security, because security only can make sense if it is collective, no selective securities. And then the Geneva talks, that and so-called Helsinki Accord. So it's a decalogue that created, that gave a birth, mutual recognition of borders in Europe, what I was preaching very, very long for Asia as well. So the giving a birth to a so-called Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, and which turned into its Budapest Summit of '94 into an Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is headquartered here in Vienna. Right now, I'm sitting in the building of the United Nations. As you know, Vienna is one of the 4 principal seats of United Nations, besides Geneva, New York, and Nairobi. But also Vienna is a headquarter of Organization for Security and Cooperation, is not too far from here. So then the notion of collective security, confidence building measures, active peaceful coexistence, and all other important achievements in security architecture of post-war period. Then the Gorbachev-Reagan talks of 80s. They met in series. They met several several occasions and several formats. And disarmament and security non-expansion guarantees given by that time American president. Then the late dream of the common European home. So it's so-called common European home, which would stretch from Lisbon to Vladivostok, and partnership for peace that has been offered by that time NATO, which would be transforming into a peace-loving and peaceful, strictly defensive organization, open for everyone on amicable and friendly and non-preferential basis. And then the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, defensive alliance, which unfortunately has a 30 years of offensive history. NATO alliance and had 9 rounds of enlargement, and particularly interesting are those of the 90s. Eastern Germany without any referendum, so it was basically an Anschluss of Eastern Germany, which has been without any signing documents, without any treaties, was taken into NATO and also was taken into European Union, while so many countries have went into lengthy way to join either of the associations. Then 93, 3 countries joined. Then in 2004, 7. In 2009, another 2, and 17 it was Croatia, was 1, and 2020 was Macedonia, the Republic of Macedonia. So 28 European and 2 North American countries, notably Canada and United States. Then the less formal but lasting partnership with a number of neutral European states, including Sweden and Finland. Now everybody talks about actually end of neutrality of Sweden and Finland, but they've been integrated in different forms and different ways, and the formats into NATO, including the military drills. Then the NATO interventions or interventionism of NATO in Europe, in Asia, in Northern Africa, and the score, the epilogue of all those interventions in different formats. So the continued dismissal of Russian security concerns, which also represents a huge item. And if we have any talks and any peace and reconciliation, we have to get back to this issue as well. And it unfortunately comes from the US State Department. And then the Ukrainian neutrality and nuclear disarmament, which was coming with the dissolution of Soviet Union back in 1991. And then the Minsk I and Minsk II peace accords, and then the Maidan events of 2014, secessionistic referendum of Crimea, and of Donbass with the Lugansk and Donetsk. Then the provocation of NATO and US Ukrainian military cooperation, as it was seen as a provocation, equipping and training and exercising since basically at least 2014. Then unexplained biolaboratory activities, which then takes us back to the Biological Weapons Conventions and the monitoring of compliance mechanism. Because the building on the other side, I will just turn you the screen. This is the famous Atomic Energy Agency. And the Atomic Energy Agency is the organization that deals with the actually so-called Non-Proliferation Treaty. They are guardians of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And they have the teams, numerous teams of inspectors who are inspecting nuclear facilities all over the world and are checking whether the nuclear science and nuclear facilities are used for exclusively for pacific purposes, for peaceful purposes, or they have a military actually capability or military configuration. We don't have such a monitoring of compliance mechanism for the Biological Weapons Convention, especially for the biological activities or the biolab activities of the countries on the foreign soil. And we have disturbing information that basically some of the biolabs are not only in Ukraine, but elsewhere around Russia, and that the personnel has the foreign diplomatic status, which of course triggers, it could be nothing special and nothing too worrisome, but it is unexplained. And of course, it makes additional tension in the entire situation. Then presidential statement at the Munich, the Zelensky, president of Ukraine, statement at the Munich Security Conference in early February 2022, when he was very explicitly telling that Ukraine will rearm itself and will reacquire nuclear weaponry, which was also highly, it was a shocking and highly disturbing statement. And then the credibility of so-called unprovoked invasion of Ukraine versus unprovoked invasion of Iraq mantra. So you can make a little scientific experiment. You can go to internet and you say, because the mantra is unprovoked intervention of Russia on Ukrainian soil. So you can try on internet, just to go on Google or other search engines and then put unprovoked intervention or unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and see how many clicks you get, and unprovoked intervention in Libya or unprovoked intervention in Iraq, and you will see a strike gap, actually a difference. So whether they've been provoked or not doesn't matter for this experiment, but just see who is reporting and how many clicks, how many entries you get in usually in 20-30 seconds. So basically then the capacity and willingness to honor agreed international treaties, and that comes to the, let's say, primarily the big powers, or the, let's say, the stakeholders in the international relations. So it's a SALT agreement, START agreement, it's a partnership for peace, it's Iranian nuclear talks, it's a Kyoto provisions of the famous United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change with the Kyoto and then later Paris periodic protocols, then UNCLOS, the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention, and so on and so forth. So capacity and actual predictability, whether you will be a signing and ratifying party and whether you will stay or suddenly you walk out of the deal. And then we come to the fourth item, which are the economic aspects. So the world's most traded commodities are crude. Number one, it's, if I'm not mistaken, 12% of everything traded on the globe on a daily basis is crude. Then the natural gas is number three, and then the wheat actually, we Europeans, we eat bread, you know, while Asians are more related to, or actually they put emphasis on rice in their daily food. But Europeans and let's say non-Asians are actually dependent on wheat, and wheat is number 5 on the traded commodities. Then the costs are induced, like in every crisis, and costs are paid. Who is paying costs? Who induces costs and who pays the costs? Usually it is compensated over the peripheral countries and the peripheral social categories within those countries. And who is peripheral? Peripherals are those by locations, by the size, or inner capacitation, or to say incapacitation. These are usually the payers of the costs. Then the temporary actually gain of the military-industrial complex, which the gains are huge, but the loss for the overall world stability and security, because you know the military-industrial complex is industrial complex, and it is a big employer, but per definition this is a destructive branch of industry, which brings, you know, the more success in this industry, the less stability and security in the world. So therefore, I say, okay, the gains are the temporary or short-sighted in a way. Dismantling of the obsolete or old military weaponry on the Ukrainian soil, free of charge. Then its replacement exclusively with the Western military purchases, and all financed by the Ukrainians through its new loans, donations, and lend and lease arrangements. US Congress was already debating lease and lend and lease a contract for Ukraine back in January, nearly 2 months before the conflict have started, have been launched. Actually, United States Congress was discussing a loan of lend and lease stipulations arrangements for $30 billion US dollars, and finally, at the end, Ukrainians are beneficials of 40 billion. So the transparency and the rhythm and the shapes and configurations of this should be also seen. And then the sanctions continuity, and then preparation time for 6 rounds, legality, geography, impact, and contraindications of those sanctions. This is also to further elaborate. Apparently, out of so-called 6 rounds of sanctions, now we are at the level of the so-called 6th level of sanctions. Apparently the speed and the anonymity within the Western world of the 4 rounds of sanctions implies or gives us a credible, let's say, assumption that it was premeditated and prepared before. So the 4 rounds of sanctions apparently were prepared. So we would like to see whether someone can refute this argument, but so far there is usually a lot of hot air, but not argumentation or counter-argumentation. And then confiscation of overseas deposits and the private property, which goes into reputation and credibility impact. And then the notion of so-called secondary sanctions and the so-called friendly, unfriendly nations. On one side, the collective West is telling, okay, so we would punish those who are dealing with Russia, which means secondary sanctions. So the first sanctions is you put object A on sanctions, and then secondary sanctions are you sanction object C because of dealing with the object A. So that's so-called notion of the secondary sanctions. Or in reply, Russians are having notion of friendly and unfriendly nations. So that's how they see things. And then the de-dollarization of the world or of the world economy, which is already some sort of, I would label this as a Russian paradox. Actually, Russia is at war, but actually its economy indicators are getting better and better. And then fragmentation of the global monetary system, and many are predicting, prophesizing the end of so-called yes domination. Yes, actually symbolizing symbolizing yen, the Japanese yen, European euro, and the American dollar. So if you see those, let's say, little icons of the three currencies, then you come to this so-called yes. And then petro ruble, creation of so-called petro ruble, convertible ruble, and the Russian foreign currency reserves, which are on increase, actually skyrocketing carbon revenues. It is induced or driven by the skyrocketing carbon revenues, and then yuan that in a way appears as a world reserve currency, besides this famous three currencies of so-called yes. And then stagflation. So it's not inflation only, but stagflation. That means that the prices are getting up, which is an inflation, but also the industrial output. Since the beginning of Corona, we have the industrial output. We are manufacturing less and less, or we are manufacturing more expensive and with more troubles. So basically, prices are getting up, and the output, the production, and the number of items, any item on the market, is decreasing. And that's very, very tricky. It's very peculiar and rare situation, but it's very difficult, actually, situation for the economies. And then end of so-called debt-driven economies, because many economies are decoupling from the Russian Federation, how it is corresponding with the climate change, or decarbonization and ecological footprint that would come as well. So preferential prices for the friendly countries, which are competitive on global markets, for 25 to 35%. It's not only that Russia is dividing countries on friendly and unfriendly, but basically, for example, by giving to India or to China oil and gas under the favorable terms, that means that they are more competitive on the global market, because the final price of production is getting lower than, for example, for the Western producer or industrial house, which was anyway having struggles, in the past decade to compete with the Asians and with the newly emerging markets. Then basically disruption of supply chains of all sorts, food security, which is also jeopardized, widening the gap, deurbanization trend, because in big urban centers the food is expensive, insecurity and hunger, and of course, which might lead to social unrest. Then the number 5, ideological aspects, the deeper meanings of the entire crisis of capitalism. We can't ignore actually the system in which we live. It's a capitalism. So do we face a crisis, a deep structural crisis of capitalism or not? And then the Western civilization. Is it collective West or selective West? And then the fundamental question that West is trying to answer every time with different answer is very simple. Is it liberal to impose liberal values on illiberal societies? Christianization, colonization, responsibility to protect, regime change, and so on and so forth. Okay. And then, is Westernization of Eastern Europe possible without the anti-fascism? Because anti-fascism is a legacy of Europe. So is it possible without the anti-fascism and without anti-Russian rhetoric? Could we Westernize in Europe without actually taking a stance which would be antagonistic and very much negative towards Russia? Is it possible? Is it possible to Westernize without depopulation and industrialization? And then the 3 brave ideas in Europe of a 20th century and one of 21 of the 21st century. So I call it brave, tentatively, great, the biggest ideas, if you want to put it neutral. So answering the millennium-long pattern of history of mankind seen as a story of internal competition over the material and territorial, all governed by the alienated rulers. So basically, the entire dynamics of the humans is actually who will grab more territory, more resources, and more material things, And then the elites, the rulers who are alienated from the rest of the population. So basically, history may portray the entire human dynamic and put it in that. You are ambushing someone to steal his property, or you are waiting him to die or to get into a trouble to buy his property and to enlarge yours. So basically, if you want to simplify, you can reduce, let's say, the entire human history on this dynamic. And then the Bolshevik Revolution. This is an attempt. I'm not talking what was successful, what was not successful of the impact. I'm just opening actually what has to be considered if you want to answer thoroughly on the question, what is this crisis and what are the possible outcomes. So Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, rule of the 99%. So it's an attempt that elites of 1% are taken away, and that the revolutionary struggle of 99 of oppressed people would finally set up its own power. The formation of so-called universal organization of United Nations in 45, and then of the non-aligned movement, which was starting with the Bandung Conference of 55, and then the Belgrade establishing conference of the non-aligned movement in Belgrade 61. So that as furthering of this egalitarian and emancipatory non-territorial idea. So I'm connecting it with the Bolshevik Revolution in a sense that this is a contemplation how we can go out of the territorial idea. And then the fascism and Nazism, imperialism was actually optimization of the idea of material and territorial, and Nazism was radicalizing this idea, this quest for territorial. And then we come to Glasnost Perestroika, or dismantling of the Warsaw Pact and dissolution of Soviet Union, as a triumph of the idea of non-material and non-territorial. This was underrepresented in theory, so you will find very, very seldom articles about this, but this was a triumph of the idea of non-material and non-territorial, which was then ridiculed. It was understood as a weakness of the Russians. So basically, it's a significant departure from that. And then we have to admit, and we have always to remind ourselves, that the Soviet Russians pooled their military for 2,000 kilometers without single bullet fired, without any international conference, without any stipulations and the guarantees. So they did it practically unilaterally, and without any big power written guarantees. And then we come to the idea of the early 21st century. This is transhumanism. You will see it also, it's connected with the so-called Great Reset of the World Economic Forum, which is taking place as we speak today, depopulation and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of controversies over this. But what is transhumanism? It's again, territorial and material idea for humans without actually spiritual dimension. So neglecting the spiritual dimension of humans, reducing them on the biohackable animal or bionical, which is connected to a global internet of things network for the control and also for the commercial ends, for the commercial purposes. Then the end of the white man's supremacy. And then the intra-white man struggle. It goes with the Anglo-German clash with the Slavics, because the Eastern Europe is dominantly populated by Slavic population, and in Ukraine, practically nearly 95% of population, like in Russia, predominantly it's a Slavic population. So fragmentation of Slavic state and intra-Slavic Guernica, because this Ukrainian conflict is intra-Slavic Guernica, like the Yugoslav wars were. And then the Western recession of democracy, its vitality and the future promise. Is it the end of the Western system in place? And what will, if so, what will be a replacement of it? And then why does the leading Western intellectuals obey? We also have to open this debate. Why the Western intellectuals obey to the real or projected, even unmanifested power? And then the crisis of the leadership, and definitely the voter apathy, because voters believe whatever they do, that basically nothing will be changed. And then we are coming to a close. So the future outcome, is it a global realignment or decoupling? So what is our future if we have, future? Total destruction of Ukraine and increase of possibility of nuclear war, not only of tactical but of strategic, or the sincere peace talks. So statementship of Metternich concept of Europe, which was actually a big conference, 1815 here in Vienna after Napoleonic Wars, or the short-sightedness of the Versailles Treaty, which was the introduction into a new confrontation after the big war, the Great War, which was the name for the First World War before the Second, and then we got the new names. So it was a direct introduction because nothing was solved, and then we got a big conflict, which ended up with the 2 nuclear bombs on Asian soil. So, and then the meanings for Asia Pacific. So the meanings for the Pan-Asian destabilizing momentum, and then the RIC format, which is very important. Those are the huge, actually the biggest, the heavyweights of the continental part of Asia, not the peninsular or the Icelandic part of Asia, but continental, which is Russia to the north, India to the southeast, and then China to the southeast China and southwest India. So a so-called RIC format, and this triangular dynamics, and then implication for the intra-Muslim debate. The Islamic world, and of course Indonesia as the largest Muslim country, this is very relevant and very important. Islam and modernity, the huge debates which were taking place in the Islamic world. And then the implications for the core Muslim world of MENA, of the Middle East and North Africa. And then implications for so-called peripheral, non-Arab Muslim world, in which actually is, of course, Malaysia, Indonesia, and other countries. And then finally, the implications for Republic of Indonesia. So the tentative proposals for Kemlu, although I had a pleasure and opportunity to talk to people from Kemlu. Of course, they are concerned for different reasons. So those talks will go on, of course. Not every aspect of those talks is for the public debate, but what we can share today is definitely Republic of Indonesia on the global scene. It's a position in the United Nations. It's a position in the non-aligned movement as a funding member. It's OIC. It's G20, which is hosted now by Indonesia. Then the urgent need for the reform of United Nations and its specialized agencies. There is a disturbing news that several countries, including Russia, are pulling out from the World Health Organization and also from WTO. So it's indeed the recession of the multilateralism taking place. And then Republic of Indonesia in Asia, the ASEAN, which is headquartered anyway in Jakarta, and it's different formats of ASEAN +3 and so on. And then the neighborhood, the policy and the border disputes, the lasting border disputes, unsolved issues in the South China Sea and so on and so forth, competing claims and so on and so forth. And then question of the Republic of Indonesia and the sanctions which might get in the escalation in the form of so-called secondary sanctions, in which actually Indonesia should take always sides, and it can't stay neutral. And the side to take is a rule of international law, the United Nations Charter and spirit of the Charter, which of course Indonesians understood very perfectly, and Indonesia does take sides. Indonesia is not neutral. And then what would be the position of Indonesia in intra-Asian military escalation or any other disruptive elements that might come or asymmetric threats. So concluding, basically, what is important, the critical insight formation and the speed and comprehensiveness of this, or of both, of the problem and of the answer, costs and distribution. So we will always have actually the issue in which certain problem appears, So how fast and how comprehensive we see the problem, how do we formulate the question? Because our answer will depend on the way how we formulate the question. And then, what is the costs and who covers the cost? This is always with every crisis, since humans, you know, were chopping meat of those mammoths with the bones and sticks, you know, up to the nuclear age of the human race. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Anis, for the very comprehensive presentation. I saw it very interesting to see that this war actually affect various aspects, and when you divide it into a lot of aspects like this, we know now that how complex it actually is. And in the meantime, I guess we're still waiting for questions to be pulled in our YouTube channel. But if I may, to kick the discussion off, I have some questions for you, Mr. So in your presentation earlier, you mentioned about who will pay the cost for this crisis. I believe that the entire world will pay it. We have been seeing 3 months into this war, the world has suffered quite a significant blow. Rising oil prices, rising inflation rates, and disruption of supply chains of numerous products. Where and how will this end? And is there any concerted efforts by the world leaders that can be done to overcome these major problems?
Very good question. No, actually, we don't have any agreements. There are no talks. I understood that a few days ago, of course, I mean, I don't have those, let's say, the information who calls whom, but all my indications were telling, or my sources were telling, that there is no direct communication since the beginning of war. There is no direct communication between Washington and Moscow, and I've understood that a Minister of Defense was talking with the Secretary of Defense on the American call, and this was the first high-level conversation. Is it so? How long and what kind of talk was that? We don't have insights. You know, we have to rely on the press release and some indirect information. As you know, there is a media blockout actually on the West, so it's very difficult to get information. I must say that actually the crisis was starting. The crisis was sparked even before the Corona crisis, and definitely with the Corona crisis. So the supply chains disruptions, the food shortages, the huge inflation was already taking place. So during the Corona pandemic, I want to remind our viewers that United States was printing out of thin air, was printing as many as $4,000 billion, while the European Central Bank was printing, they call it quantitative easing. It's actually a fiat money without any cover. 6,000 billion euros. So the actually entire America and Eurozone have been swimming in the money, and the inflation was on a rise. Inflation was about to come. So basically, the war in many aspects is a very convenient excuse to blame. Our problems are structural, our problems are deeper, and our problems are going into a nature of capitalism, depth-driven economies, and some sort of redistribution of political power, of influence, of markets, and all other things, which unfortunately the power centers would never give up voluntarily, and they go through the actually radicalization of positions and very often with the war. And look, war, I mean, although limited war, imagine, you know, just to visualize, imagine that you are driving solid car and you are driving, you know, the lanes of Monaco. Monaco is a beautiful place, you know, on the between France and French and the Western Italian Riviera. And they are beautiful lanes, you know, with a lot of curves. And you are driving a rather reliable car, but you are speeding and speeding, and the curves are becoming, you know, tougher and tougher. It requires more and more skills, and the possibility of crash is getting more and more likely. This is how actually this conflict or radicalization of position looks like. And then finally, war means, you know, you are already driving over 100 kilometers per hour. The radicalization of position was getting onto the, you know, up. And then with the war, you don't have both hands on the steering wheel, you have just one, and you are speeding up over 100. And the curves are becoming tougher.
Thank you so much, Professor. We have also another question. This is from our YouTube channel. This is from Kova Romero. What can you tell us about India's role in the conflict as a supposed Western ally, but with an economic stake to consider? How will India's positioning reorganize the balance of power?
You mean with India? Basically, we have so-called RIC format, as I mentioned before. So that there is a so-called BRICS format, which includes Brazil and South Africa. Even Indonesia was contemplating to become this additional letter I in this BRICS puzzle. So besides the BRICS puzzle, we have 3 countries of the BRICS having so-called triangular format, which is India, China, and Russia. India's position is in a way limited. So India is, of course, wanted by both. You know, Russians are sending very seducing appeals to India, calls which are very appealing to India. Including actually exclusive delivery of energencies and other raw materials under the beneficial, let's say, prices. And with the long-term contracts, India has actually a special relationship with Russia, especially over the military equipment. So interestingly, the trade of India, the foreign trade of India is related with the West, but when it comes to the military, it is nearly exclusively related to, at that time, to Soviet Union and lately to Russia. And on the other side, West is trying to get India into so-called Indo-Pacific format together with Japan, with Korea. We will see now we will witness the visit of United States President to Asia, in which actually those Indo-Pacific formats to deter China would be on place. But interesting thing for India is actually that India's concern is China, and they have many unsolved issues. And basically, the power to deter China, to slow down and to stop, to influence China is not in the hands of the West or United States. It's more in Russia. So there are different reasons why India is actually keeping this partnership very close and is not joining any sanctions, and would most probably offer, if the things get into a binary categorization, India would finally end up with on the side of Russia. Right now is rather neutral and keeps the equidistantral position, but would side up with my feeling is would side up with Russia rather than the West. Why? Because actually partnership with Russia can offer more. So the cheap energy, cheap raw materials, access to the military equipment, and then the deterrence capability when it comes to China. we witnessed recently also the clashes, the open military clashes with China on India. There is a contested region of Tibet. There are unsolved issues. Modi was recently in Nepal. There are also issues related to Nepal and so on and so forth. So there are many open issues, and India does not feel actually. India, of course, has its own agendas, but India does not feel itself as a policeman in South and Eastern China Sea for the vis-a-vis the interests of Japan, Australia, and United States, getting very little in return, and basically actually confronting and provoking China from that side as well.
Thank you so much, Professor Anis. If it's okay, I mean, the time is already went past 1 minute from our schedule, but we also have two other really interesting questions, if I may.
Yes, please, please.
This is from Marina Ikasari. She's also a researcher at the Habibie Center. So many scholars believe that ASEAN could take a role in reducing tension between Russia and Ukraine by utilizing defense diplomacy forums in the region, such as the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, or ASEAN-Russia Dialogue, or the ASEAN Regional Forum, since Russia is a member of those forums. And if I'm not mistaken, Russia also a member of the TAC, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation with ASEAN. Could you have a comment on this?
So comment on what exactly?
On whether ASEAN could reduce the tension that's been going on between Ukraine and Russia.
Definitely. Look, when it comes to Indonesia, when it comes to the theater, I've been talking, every time I come to Asia, not only to Indonesia but to any other country, there is no alternative to Indonesia. There is no alternative to Asia but to go to the multilateral direction. There is an actual excellent setting, which is so-called SARC setting of the South Asia, and there is an excellent setting elsewhere. Also, Shanghai Cooperation Organization is not bad, but basically, they are trapped by their inner dynamics. The South Asian, without going into a lengthy explanations, is basically trapped in a conflict between Pakistan and India, and then the SARC has its own preoccupation because it gets Russia into the forum and China and the heavyweight Central Asians. But basically, ASEAN has this position, and Indonesia, among the Asian countries, is a champion of multilateralism. I've been writing this numerous times. So if you want to rank, the champions of multilateralism in Asia, it would be most probably India number 1, Indonesia number 2, then a couple of empty places, then Japan, I must say, in the post Second World War period, Japan have turned completely multilaterally. And then, so basically, those are the champions of multilateralism. The fact that ASEAN headquarters is in Jakarta is also a big premium. And basically, so Indonesia and other countries, other 9 countries of ASEAN should boost actually the multilateral notion, and to prevent the situation in which actually the binary escalation would come. And that means that the both sides, whoever is a side, today is Russia over Ukraine, might be ending up with China and Taiwan, although there is now the proposal of so-called 99, which is, I think, the smart and very, very eloquent move from the side of the Taiwan. So basically, it might end up in a binary situation in which you have to choose sides. And as you are multilateral and as you are increasing the potential of the multilateral setting, then you are more amortizing actually this pressure of taking sides. There is no side to take in the conflict. There is a side to take for the multilateralism, with the spirit and the notion of the Charter of United Nations and the basic principles of peaceful coexistence, active peaceful coexistence, of collective security, not selective and exclusive security. I can't develop my security on expenses of my neighbors. I can't boost my security, in which actually my neighbors are getting increasingly insecure, nervous, and they are sending me signals over the transparency. And I'm rejecting to be transparent. I'm not going into direction of confidence building measures, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, actually, the multilateralism and the ASEAN in different formats, actually also getting Papua New Guinea and also East Timor as additional members. So whoever wants to join actually would make very much sense, because I don't see any alternative to that. And Indonesia is a champion of multilateralism. Not to go into that. It starts with the 1945. It starts with the Bandung, which was an inspiration for that time founding fathers of the non-aligned movement. Non-aligned movement also has to be reaffirmed. I think the world of non-aligned movement was a great idea, and unfortunately, we are getting into a perpetuated problems and the escalatory path of the problems based on the fact that we don't have this third force, third thinking. We have just two conflicting sides, and we definitely have to go into that direction.
Thank you so much, Professor. We have another question. This is from
Yes,
Garcia
please,
Sylvia.
please.
What's your take on the possibility of war in Ukraine may impact countries in Balkan region? Do you think its implication can be beyond political and economic?
Today is Friday, correct?
Today's Friday.
So it's a Batik Day.
Batik Day. Oh, wow.
It's a Batik Day. Ah, surprise. So I'm getting into surprise.
You've been wearing it all along then.
Exactly. Exactly. So it just came to my mind this morning that it's a Batik Day.
Such a nice gesture. I myself not wearing any batik now.
It's okay. It's okay. Just once more. Yes.
Yeah. So what's your take on the possibility of war in Ukraine may impact countries in Balkan region? Do you think its implication can be beyond political and economic?
The Balkan region?
Yes.
Actually, it has implication on everyone, so that they are so-called frozen conflicts, sleeping conflicts, and basically, so when you have a large confrontation, open military confrontation, it sends always the shock waves. And then all those frozen conflicts, all those, so unsolved issues are getting back. How shall I say, when you have infection on your body and you didn't treat it well, so every time you don't sleep well or your nutrition is falling down a bit, then this infection is reappearing. For example, if you have a skin infection, which is very visible. So if you didn't heal it properly, so you don't sleep 1-2 nights properly, or you don't eat, it comes back. So it's every time getting again. The point that I was just restating, it relates Middle East, Balkans, but especially Asia. There is no single country in Asia that has no at least 2 unsolved border disputes with each of its neighbors. And it is, in a way, Asian century. Asian theater is a theater not of future. It's actually, this future already started. But many unsolved issues are there. So therefore, the multilateralism and the multilateral setting is always the best setting to solve the issues. I'm coming back to the Decalogue, to mutual recognition of borders. It's very difficult. There is one border dispute. I don't want now to mention Indonesia. It's always easier to talk about others, So there is one of the border disputes between Cambodia and Kingdom of Thailand. So, and it goes on the holy sites, there are temples, which are also giving the additional charge, because the temples are the holy properties, the holy lands, and then both sides are bringing actually a lot of emotions and the hot air, and it's contested, so it's by both sides contested. So there is no way that any incumbent or any future or any past government would recognize either of Thailand or Cambodia. Because the soon you say, okay, this is ridiculous. We don't want to run this any longer, So we will let it be, We just simply let it be. We will forget our claim and we give it to them, okay? maybe they will give it to us somewhere else, you know. So as soon as you come to this pragmatic solution, which is maybe not the fair solution, but it's pragmatic because you have to put the dot. As the saying goes, you know, if you want to be right, you know, if you want to have always the point, buy yourself a dog. You can't live in a partnership. In a partnership, you have to say sometimes, yes, darling, although you know that the other side is not correct, but you keep the atmosphere, you know, you have to keep momentum, and you say, yes, okay, you are right, although you know that the person is not right. Okay, so basically, there is no single government which will do, because it would trigger automatic crisis of the government, no confidence vote in parliament, and you are gone. So basically, every government would come to this pragmatic idea, and they would say, okay, let's close the issue. But then with the second thought, you will say, oh, I'm gonna suffer no confidence vote. I don't want to do it. And then what is politically lucrative is to fan this, to put additional charge. So you are making more and more charge, and you are creating from this charge a political culture. And this is dangerous. And then the next generation of politicians, they think, aha, the acceleration is the politics. It's anti-politics. It's not politics. It's anti-politics. It's very dangerous. It's driving, you know, with this car with the one hand, and then you are sometimes putting, you know, the hand over your eyes. This, and you are speeding up and speeding up. It's anti-politics. It's very destructive and dangerous. So, but what is solution for this? Is when we come back to the early days of detente, of Geneva talks, and finally of the Helsinki Decalogue, which I everybody invite to thoroughly examine again, to revisit the chapters. Decalogue meant actually, because there were 4 chapters, therefore is Decalogue. Although the OSCE is a basket of has 3 baskets, 3 items, it was a mutual recognition of borders. And that means actually that everybody recognized borders of everyone. And this is a solution also for ASEAN. And CAMLU, with the diplomatic efforts, can work on this, and this is time to do it, because it is a destabilizing effect. And you know, so it's foolish to believe that you will prosper while the rest of the world will go down. Those powerful centers that are going down will exploit any possibility to destabilize you as well. I have to be very clear on this. You know, it's a death or life battle, as we see. So they will not see Indonesia prospering. They would exploit everything. So what could be one of the initiatives is a mutual recognition of borders within the ASEAN member countries. And you say, let it be. Because, you know, the France and Germany were contesting and fighting thousands, if not tens of thousands, people were dying actually over the eastern border of France with Germany, Alsace and Lorraine. And at a certain point of time, and there was also with the Denmark and Germany, between Denmark and Sweden, between Sweden and Norway, between Finland and Russia, and so on and so forth. And people said, let it be. You have to guarantee me the minority rights. You have to put a high standard of minority rights. You have to give autonomy, but the physically territory is going to you. It's okay. Let it be. Let's move on. Okay. So those are the issues. Of course, I mean, today is not the format to go into a lengthy explanations, but those are the ideas how to actually bring additional stability, because the war, the famine, and everything that comes, the global realignment are all the shock waves. And if you have the sleeping disputes, if you have unsolved items, you know, if you have emotional charges, as I mentioned, you know, this border dispute between Thailand and Cambodia, and there are plenty of them, you know, it brings additional emotional charge because they are holy sites. They are related to religion. Religion is the transcending thing, you know, whether someone is religious and believer to God is not the rational discussion. It's a transcending thing. So it's very difficult when you are mixing and mingling politics into this. You know, misuse of religion for political ends was always very destructive, and so on and so forth. You understand what I'm trying to say? So the recognition or letting be. You know, the border dispute is very difficult for every government. It's nearly no go for any government. But the mutual recognition of the group of countries, of the entire continent, this is possible. And then you can move on. And that brought prosperity. It's not EU that brought prosperity for Europe. It was the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. This brought security, that brought prosperity for Europe. And why we have a war today is because we departed from this principle of Helsinki. We left Helsinki. This is a selective security of the West and of Russia over Ukraine. So this is actually in contrary to what Helsinki was telling. And this is actually, if we humanize us, this was Helsinki. It was a charter of United Nations, was a non-aligned movement, I must say, with Bandung of 55, and then with the founding conference of non-aligned movement in Belgrade of 61, in which actually Indonesia was basically playing a pivotal role. And not to forget, and I'm always repeating, I know that we are over time. So basically, Dutch, we are fighting bravely. Nazi Germany for 8 days. And then they waited, you know, they waited actually the epilogue of the war. And they've been liberated by the Soviets. And the Soviets are even not mentioned on the day of freedom, you know, be it 8th of May or 9th of May. Now in Netherlands, they are even not mentioned as a liberated. 27 million people died, you know. So physically, they've been liberated by the British force and by Americans, you know. The Anglo-Americans were physically coming into Netherlands, but that was possible because Soviets were fighting and absorbing the main shock. 27 million people died. 70,000 cities, 70,000 of cities have been destroyed in Soviet Union during the Nazi time. And then what Dutch were doing, so they've been liberated by others. They've been bravely fighting for 8 days. And then what was nearly the first thing, they set up the Navy and they went over 7 seas to Indonesia and they fought bitterly genocidal war against your people. Those chapters of history we should not forget, and that's always the time reminding young people in Indonesia. They should remember this because youngsters are, you know, forgetting things, and they get, you know, misled by the nice advertisements on the TV and the gadgets, you know, and the TikTok. But those are the chapters not to be forgotten. So what does it mean? And then this completely destroyed Indonesia, which was just gaining independence, was not getting into economic and into political autarky or economic egoism. And they had all rights to do this. No, they've been thinking and contemplating about themselves and about the position. And they said, there is a global south. We need to engage with our neighbors. A poor country, a country that have been devastated by the colonial policy, by this obeying elites that were set up by the colonizers, and then the brutal war that was taking place. And of course, all the troubles after, during and after the Second World War, because it was a shockwave. And then these brutal genocidal actually activities that were taking place all over Indonesia. So Indonesia was completely wrecked. But this country was having intellectual capability to think about itself, about its neighbors, about Asia, and about dialogue of global South. And it turned in 55 to Bandung Conference. And those are the big achievements. You should be proud of it, and you should inspire yourself from that, not from ideas from left or right side, because the inspiration, the source is there.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much for the very inspiring answer that you really go on and to related to another topic, and I found it very inspiring. But I think we have come to the end of today's discussion. As you mentioned, we have
It's Friday, yeah.
it's Friday and it's been overtime now. But I would like to thank the speaker, Professor Anis, for your insights on this issue and for all of your comments and responses. It has been an immense honor for me and the Habibie Center to have you as our speaker today. I would also like to thank our participants for taking part into today's discussion and have been very active, asking a bunch of very great questions for our discussion today. Apologies, as not every questions could be addressed today due to the time constraints. Nevertheless, I hope all of you have enjoyed our webinar. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I
my
look forward.
batik. So
And your batik is
it's a solo batik. It's from the birth city of President of Indonesia. For those who do not know what is and where is Solo,
it's a very amazing.
it's a
batik.
typical Java.
Yes, yes, it is. I hope all of you enjoyed our webinar, and I hope you stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you in the Habibie Center, other events. Thank you so much, Professor.
Terima kasih, terima kasih.
Terima kasih.